What's up, guys? Ron from Ron Ready Law, and in this video, I'm going to give you 9 red flags to look out for on your next commercial real estate purchase. Okay, everybody knows that the market is going crazy. Interest rates keep going up, but inventory is still at an all-time low, and sellers are not reducing their price. So if you're looking for a deal and you think that you finally found something that you want to pull the trigger on, you've got to understand what red flags an experienced real estate investor would look for and which red flags should kill a deal versus what can be overlooked as a risk that you're willing to take. Before I get into that, I do want to share this. This is a pretty cool drawing. This is from my daughter, and she built our office building here, including, I don't know if you can see that, she's got the logo on the building, that double R. It's kind of cool. Some cats. All right, well, sidebar aside, if you skipped forward, we're ready to jump into these red flags. Okay, the number one red flag that I look for in a building is high vacancy rates. And what that means is not just your particular building, if it's multi-tenant, but what does the market vacancy look like? Because there's a lot of value add opportunity in buying buildings with maybe a medium 50 to 60%, 70% vacancy. But if the market vacancy is hovering around 75%, it's unlikely that you'll be able to push your building above that when there's lots of competing space in that market. So just understand what your goal should be for a stabilized occupancy. Number 2, economic factors. So this is one of the bread and butter for people that are out of state, or if you're investing in other markets, places that you don't drive, you don't visit, and you don't talk to people in that market every single day. You've got to start creating proxies based on household income, population density. You could look at unemployment rates. All of these objective factors could be used to quickly compare a property. And again, this is one of those soft red flags where even if the economic indicators aren't great, the property itself can still be a home run. And so I would say this is kind of 50-50, but it's certainly a red flag if there's a combination of other red flags. Days on market, again, this is probably another soft red flag. If a property's been sitting long, I just attribute that to something is wrong with the presentation, something is wrong with the property, and something's wrong with the price. None of those necessarily mean that I won't buy the deal. I just have to understand what it is and fix that problem before I go under contract. So again, this is kind of a 50-50. I think days on market, maybe you have a more willing seller if they really want to sell, if there's been some price cuts. Other than that, days on market is not really a great proxy. Crime rates. This one is kind of an interesting question for commercial real estate because it really depends on the type of property that you have, how much you care about crime. And it's all on a spectrum, right? If you're buying residential, if you're buying multifamily, absolutely you care about crime. If you have an office building, you care about crime. If you even have some types of storage, multi-tenant, flex space, you care less so, but you do care about crime. And this is as a side note for my multifamily investors. The best proxy that I learned, and I have a great conversation with Dan, is do single women feel comfortable walking their dog or exercising outside this property? If the answer is yes, A, rent's going to be high. B, that is a property that you want to own. And it's a very subjective test, but it does bring a different analogy, or it brings some color into how do we evaluate whether something is safe. Crime rates don't really mean anything other than a weird proxy. Are you looking at vehicles? Are you looking at burglaries? Are we talking like murders and homicides? Or are we just talking about property crimes? Really hard to compare apples to apples on crime rates, even if it's 8% increase over last year. Well, what does that mean? Is it violent crime? That sort of thing. On the flip side, if I have a single tenant warehouse, I absolutely don't care about crime. I mean, obviously I want it to be secure and I want the tenant to be secure in their space, but that's something that the tenant is going to invest their own money into, and presumably they know the area and they've done their homework. But in terms of a spectrum, I do not really ever look at crime rate for a single tenant industrial triple net property. Finally, the numbers. We're really in a very dynamic time of pricing, of rents, of property tax increases, net effective rent. All of these things are changing, and you've got to build in buffer. There was a great tweet on Retweet the other day where he was talking about his property taxes going up. I think it was Multifamily Madness. I don't know. Don't quote me. And he said, "Oh my gosh, it went up by $200 a unit." But he wasn't sweating it because he said, I don't underwrite so tightly that $200 per unit on it's like a 68 unit property kills my margins. And so it was great that he had enough contingency into his annual P&L that he had reserves to cover this type of increase of expenses. And so that's kind of the red flag too, is if you have to pencil everything really, really thin and all of your expenses have to hit exactly $1,366 for trash removal every month, but if you go over to $1,500, it blows your budget and it eats into your returns, that's a problem. Unfavorable lease terms, really, really critical. I think that some people look at leases as a standard lease and there's not that much variation. They just assume that it's given, and if the broker tells them it's triple net and the tenant pays for everything, they just accept that as gospel. But it really needs to be a red flag if there are out of market terms putting additional liability on the landlord, and you've got to understand who drafted this and how much leverage there was between the parties, whether it was an arm's length lease. Zoning and land use, this is a huge deal. Depending on what your plans are for the property, you may need a supplemental use, a conditional use permit for future buyers if they're going to be developers. Really, really important that, again, you want to understand what the zoning is even if you're grandfathered in, because there's a huge difference between having zoning as a matter of right versus having a grandfathered use, because it really is going to affect your ability to construct improvements, make any changes, parking. And you have to discount a property a little bit if it's a grandfathered use versus a use that's a matter of right. So really important distinction there. Deferred maintenance, again, this is an interesting red flag because, again, I'll put it in that kind of medium category. If the seller is forthright and identifies deferred maintenance and tells you a reason why he didn't do it, I'm okay to buy a property with the understanding that I'm reflecting it in the purchase price. If the seller doesn't necessarily disclose right away and you have to discover deferred maintenance or you have to ask about deferred maintenance, that can be a red flag because it may show that the seller is not investing money into the building, and there will always be problems with the building that you could not discover during due diligence or did not discover. And that's plumbing, that's anything behind the walls, electrical, anything that gets taped up or boarded up and drywalled over, you can't see it. And so that's really, I think, a great quote, right? How you do one thing is how you do everything. And that's really kind of a good analogy for some of the sellers that cut corners on deferred maintenance. So are they doing the AC maintenance contract? Are they doing cleanouts? Right? These things need maintenance, at least on an annual basis, just to have a checkup, adjust the springs, lubricate things. You want a seller to have a good book of that type of maintenance. But if they don't, it kind of sends us message about what other things may have they cut corners on. So again, it's kind of a 50-50, but it's probably my biggest red flag if you have to discover some type of deferred maintenance that the seller doesn't disclose. Finally, environmental concerns. This one is really a huge deal breaker. If you find conditions on the site, if you have a phase 1 that recommends a phase 2, a lot of people are going to kill this deal, and I don't disagree with them. It really, to me, just shows a serious concern about hidden liabilities. And what you don't know is what the scope is. If you're above ground and you see a broken HVAC and you say, okay, that's 10, 15 grand. We've got 4 units, that's capped. There is some cap of liability based on systems that you can see with your own eyes. With environmental concerns, You may not see $50,000 worth of remediation work. You may not see $150,000 or $500,000. And the problem is just that liability could be, I won't say endless, but it could be a much bigger number than you're able to pocket. And it is your liability if you purchase the land. That's it for this combination of red flags when buying commercial real estate. Some of these are 50-50. I would say if you have a combination of more than 2 or 3, you probably want to take a hard look at the deal and consider backing out. But 1 or 2 is not going to deter me. That's where the value add. So smash that like button. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.